Okay, this is part 20, the Synagogue of Satan, Footprints in History. I left off in the last part with the beginning of the 30 Years' War. The war finally ended in 1648 with the Peace of Westphalia. Some of the major outcomes of the war were that the Holy Roman Empire ceased to be a dominant power, and France became the dominant power of Europe. The bankers, of course, increased in power, and the Dutch Republic was finally recognized by the Habsburgs and the Holy Roman Empire. The city of Genoa ceased to be part of the Holy Roman Empire, and Venice was no longer a power except its banking operations had moved out of the actual city of Venice, so the Venetian bankers were even more powerful. It's usually taught that the 30 Years' War was a war of religion. It started out that way with the Protestants of Bohemia, but soon became a battle between France and the Habsburgs. The mastermind for the French was Cardinal Richelieu, and historians have often wondered why Catholic France would fight on the side of the Protestants, but Cardinal Richelieu was almost certainly a Rosicrucian and connected to the shadowy orders of knights and secret societies behind the scenes. The English Civil War was really just a part of the 30 Years' War, beginning toward the end. Oliver Cromwell led Puritans in a war to overthrow King Charles I. Oliver was related to Thomas Cromwell, who was an agent of Venetian bankers. The English Civil War was supposedly a battle between those that favored the power of Parliament and those that favored the power of the king. Oliver Cromwell brought Jews from the Netherlands into England, even though they were still technically banned from the country. King Charles I was executed in 1649 on charges of treason. Many consider this murder, and it may be that the king was really executed because he wouldn't revoke the ban against Jews begun by Edward I. The war was really about the formation of a republic based on the Republic of Venice in England. Oliver Cromwell waged a brutal and devastating campaign in Scotland and Ireland against those that were loyal to the king. Cromwell had close ties and also received financial support from Jews and synagogues in Holland, and he also had many secret Jews in his military operations. The rule of the Puritan Cromwell and his supporters became known as the Commonwealth. By this time, England became more and more divided by dissenting sects with various beliefs, such as Quakers, Ranters, Levelers, Diggers, Fifth Monarchists, and so on. Oliver Cromwell would use many from these dissenting sects and some of the poorest parts of society to rule his Commonwealth. Admiral William Penn was a Navy commander for the parliamentarians in the English Civil War, and for the Commonwealth under Cromwell after that. He was probably more a privateer or pirate than anything else. One of the few things known about his shadowy origins is that he was from Bristol, which was known to be a haven for pirates. He seems to have had no moral loyalty to any side in the war and seemed to work for anything that brought the most profit. In 1654, Penn failed in an attempt to take Hispaniola for the English Commonwealth under the command of Cromwell. He was, however, able to take Jamaica from Spain, but Penn actually changed sides and supported the Royalist cause, eventually bringing Charles II back to England from exile in the Netherlands. By this time, Dutch Calvinists and English Calvinist Puritans were establishing themselves in North America, in New England and New Netherlands. The Puritans superseded Native Americans and also English Pilgrims that were actually Baptists and not Puritans. The English Commonwealth came to an end when Charles II took the throne in 1660. Admiral William Penn became a Navy commander for Charles II and fought against the Dutch Republic. Charles II was Catholic, and he wanted to give freedom of religion to the dissenters in England if Catholics also could have freedom of religion in his kingdom, but many saw this as a so-called popish plot to restore Catholicism to England. So right here one might see the dialectic at work, the problem-reaction-solution. You might ask, were the Calvinist Puritans just a tool in the hands of the Pope? A strong Calvinist foe could make Catholics stronger and eventually able to overthrow any that would stand in the way of the Pope. Puritanism seemed to be just a revised form of the ascetic type of Gnosticism. There's a widespread misconception that the Puritans were Christian at all. It's certain that they followed only the Old Testament of the Bible, closer to being Jewish but with modifications of a Christian veneer, and in fact many of them may have been Marranos or crypto-Jews. Many of the Puritans of New England were quite wealthy. They prospered in shipping, and there's clear evidence that they operated plantations in the Caribbean, profiting in the slave trade, the cultivation of sugar, and the production of alcohol. Some Jews came to New Amsterdam, which would become known as New York, and they would be segregated there in a place surrounded by a wall. Incidentally, the place where the wall was is now known as Wall Street. This all may have been a ploy by the Dutch Calvinists to draw attention away from the fact that many Dutch Calvinists themselves were secretly Kabbalists or Jewish. At the other end of the spectrum from Calvinists were groups like the Ranters and Diggers. They were basically just a revised form of antinomian Gnosticism. They believed that the law was no longer required, just like the ancient Gnostics. Another group that became much more important was the Quakers. They had a belief in a so-called inner light, which was really just a remodeled version of the ancient Gnostic belief in what was known as the divine spark of man. The Quakers basically practiced a form of Mithraism, further modified to appear as Christianity. And the Quakers didn't even think the Bible was necessary for faith, and it's curiously ironic that the Quakers discarded the Bible after Protestants had fought long and hard to make it available to all in the languages of each country, and not just to an elite corps of priests. There was another group that was supposedly Jewish, but had practices that were most closely related to the ancient Gnostic Carpocratians. Their leader was known as Sabbatai Zevi, who was a Jew in the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and he operated in Salonika, where there was a large body of Jews. His father was an agent for English Puritan merchants. In 1666, he proclaimed himself to be the Messiah, but he was eventually forced to convert to Islam by the Ottoman Sultan. He was denounced when he openly forsook the Jewish religion, and many Jews objected to his practices and claims and rejected his teachings, but a core of his followers survived, and his teachings lived on, no doubt, with the Carpocratians. It's very interesting that in the very same year that Sabbatai Zevi proclaimed himself to be the Messiah, the city of London in England was devastated by the Great Fire, and it distracted people from a very important event that is little known. It was the passing of a modified Sestui Act. When many members of Parliament were away because of the dangers and devastation of the fire, the act was passed by a rump parliament. The act further deprived the populace of property. Through the act, the government claimed property of a person at birth to be held in a so-called trust. If property was not claimed by the age of 7, the person was considered lost at sea, and their property became the property of the state. This is obviously preposterous. How is someone under 7 years old going to even know to claim their property? By this time, European powers were forming trading posts all around the world, and piracy was a growing problem. The common symbol for pirates was a skull and crossbones, but it was also the symbol for Grand Masters of the Templars, Rosicrucians, and even Freemasons. So was it Templars that were really harassing the shipping in the Caribbean? Was it Pirates of the Caribbean or Pirates of the Templars? A lot of wealth was taken from Spanish ships. Did piracy have an even more shadowy purpose than it appeared? Was this really just following the Pope's secret agreement with England at the expense of Spain? The supposed date that Columbus landed in the New World may be a Templar hidden message. It's the same date that the Templars were expelled from France. In 1681, King Charles II of England granted the colony of Pennsylvania to William Penn, the son of Admiral William Penn, for a repayment owed by King Charles for some service. It's not certain exactly what the debt was. By this time, Newport, Rhode Island had taken over the world slave trade from Venice. Most of the settlers that came to America at this time were Protestants, but it's interesting that the Protestant churches look more like synagogues than anything else. And also there are records that most of the slave ships were owned by Jews. It's also very interesting that at a very strategic location, the middle of the eastern seaboard of North America, there was none other than a Catholic colony, and just next to it was a Swedish colony which recently had a Catholic monarch. And the two most powerful colonies, Virginia and Massachusetts, were both commonwealths, which actually points to communism and also echoes the papal crown, commonwealth, or aeterni regis. Communist governments were also established in South America by the Jesuits. Virginia was colonized by many royalists or cavaliers. Many of these were actually Baptists, and they could be said to be disgruntled younger sons. They were younger sons of the nobility that had no inheritance according to English law. More Native Americans in New England died from disease than in war with the Puritan settlers. Elements within the Puritans of Massachusetts no doubt used sugar, alcohol, and smallpox as a weapon to wipe out Native Americans in the region. Native Americans were seen by many Puritans as enemies of the old Templar so-called New Jerusalem in the New World. Harvard University appears to have been established to study herbs and disease for biological warfare. The Salem witch trials also appear to have been used as a means to discredit real Christians. By this time, merchants, bankers, and Jews were firmly entrenched in England, and they would use a divide and conquer tactic to get control of Parliament. They would use divisions between what would become known as Tories and Whigs. Whigs desired a Protestant succession of the English throne. Tories were loyal to the king, and some radical Tories were loyal to the Stuart dynasty specifically. In 1688, King James II was overthrown in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. This was a takeover of Parliament and control of the king, but Parliament itself was controlled by the merchants and bankers. They would use fear of the rising power of Louis XIV of France and also of a Catholic plot to retake England to raise a national debt, and they would use the debt to tax even the landowning class. The Protestant rulers William and Mary were set up as king and queen jointly in 1689. It's a bit odd that they were both partly of the Stuart dynasty, so the Stuarts were still on the throne of England. William was known as William of Orange. He was basically an oligarch from the Dutch Republic. In 1694, the Bank of England was established in London, supposedly to finance the national debt. It's a bit odd that the bank was formed the very same year that Queen Mary died. She may have been opposing the formation of the bank. The Bank of England basically transferred wealth from every class of society in England, and all it really did was enrich bankers, merchants, and the military complex. So I'll continue in the next part with the rise of the British Empire and its struggle with France, and also with further developments in North America. So until next time.